counting or not counting gang violence. Great.
Oh my God. Go, run! Whoa.
The crack of a single gunshot turned an ordinary college afternoon into a moment the country will not easily forget. Charlie Kirk, the 31-year-old founder of Turning Point USA, was struck while speaking at Utah Valley University, and in an instant a room full of debate and energy became a scene of chaos and grief. If you want to follow every development on this story and others like it, hit the subscribe button now and turn on the bell so you don't miss breaking updates. Charlie Kirk was fatally shot during his American comeback tour at Utah Valley University. It was meant to be the first stop on a series of events designed to energize young conservatives and to reintroduce a national voice whose methods and message had become familiar across campuses and online platforms. Instead, the day unfolded into a nightmare. Witnesses say the event had the rough edges of a political rally. A crowded outdoor space, students and townspeople mingling, cameras and phones held aloft. Kirk, who built his public life on direct engagement, was taking questions and leaning into the exchange when the sound erupted. People dove for cover, others shouted for help, and within minutes the scene was a blur of running feet and frantic phone calls. Security moved quickly, emergency medical teams arrived, and Kirk was rushed away, but the injuries proved fatal. The place that should have been a stage for debate became a crime scene, and the weight of that transformation is part of what made the incident so shocking. An institution of learning, a public square, a forum for ideas, all turned suddenly into a place defined by violence. The sudden death shocked supporters, critics, and political figures across the nation. In a country where political disagreement often carries a high volume, it is still rare to see politics end in bloodshed on a campus lawn. The immediate reactions ran the gamut. There were raw expressions of grief, of anger, and of disbelief. Supporters mourned a leader and organizer who had built an influential platform from near nothing. Opponents, even those who had long clashed with him in arguments and campaigns, voiced sorrow at the human loss. The instantaneous flood of social media content, videos, eyewitness accounts, speculation, prayers, reflected how connected and how divided the public conversation now is. Leaders at local, state, and national levels urged calm, called for facts rather than conjecture, and promised thorough investigations. For many who watched the videos and read the first reports, the shock was not only about losing a recognizable public figure, it was about the realization that the spaces we imagine as safe for debate can, under certain conditions, become deadly. That realization has unsettled people across the political spectrum and has sparked urgent conversations about what it will take to restore a sense of safety in civic life. He co-founded Turning Point USA at just 18 to amplify conservative voices on campuses. Looking back, Kirk's story reads like a case study in rapid political entrepreneurship. As a teenager, he saw what he believed to be a gap, conservative students who felt marginalized in the academy, and he set about building an organization to change that dynamic. Turning Point USA began as a small network of activists who tabled on campuses and held events. Over time it grew into a national infrastructure with chapters at high schools and colleges. The organization trained volunteers, organized protests and counter-events, produced media content, and became a conduit for conservative messaging aimed at young people. That early strategy, showing up where debates happen and doing so with energy, made Turning Point an engine for youth engagement in conservative politics. The organization also proved how modern movements are built, through social media amplification, viral stunts, and a relentless focus on recruiting and training new activists. This origin story helps explain both the admiration he drew from followers and the suspicion he provoked among critics. He was an organizer as much as a commentator, and that dual role is central to the impact he had on political life. Kirk rose from grassroots activism to become a major influence on Republican youth politics. He did it by mixing messaging savvy with consistent visibility. From speaking tours and campus events to radio shows and podcasts, he polished a public persona that appealed to a certain generation, people who wanted culture and policy arguments delivered with blunt, unapologetic language. More than rhetoric, however, Kirk's operation created pathways. Recruits went from campus leadership roles into political campaigns and policy shops. helping to move young activists into positions where they could affect elections and the broader conservative agenda. By the time he was in his late 20s and early 30s, the footprint of his work extended into national politics. That influence was felt not only in the votes and volunteers he helped marshal but in the way he shaped arguments and priorities, from campus free speech controversies to fights over curricula and social norms. His ability to translate grassroots energy into tangible political activity made him a significant actor, and it meant that his loss would have consequences that extended beyond the immediate circle of friends and supporters. His bond with Donald Trump positioned him as a face of populist conservatism. The past decade of American politics has seen the emergence of a populist strain that prizes directness, distrust of traditional elites, and a willingness to disrupt established norms. Kirk's worldview fit comfortably within that framework, and he forged ties with leaders who shared a combative style and populist instincts. That alignment went beyond mere rhetorical affinity. It involved mutual reinforcement, with national figures leveraging Turning Point's organizational reach and his followers amplifying messaging on behalf of sympathetic candidates. That relationship elevated Kirk's platform while also placing him squarely in the larger debates about the direction of the conservative movement. To supporters, the partnership with populist leaders was a natural alliance in pursuit of a political realignment. To critics, it represented an embrace of a confrontational politics that often eschewed compromise. In either case, the ties to prominent national figures magnified both his influence and his vulnerability. His public profile made him a central node in a contentious political ecosystem. Witnesses described chaos, fear, and disbelief immediately after the fatal gunshot. For those who were in the crowd, the day will be remembered in disjointed, vivid fragments. The snap of the shot, the shout of warning, the sickening sight of someone falling, the scramble to safety. Some people tried to render aid, while others dialed relatives and friends asking for help. Security personnel and local law enforcement moved with urgency, clearing the area and coordinating medical response. The images and testimonies that followed are stark reminders of how quickly ordinary public life can fragment. Beyond the physical damage, the injuries and the damage to property and nerves, there is a psychological toll. Students who once saw campus events as opportunities for debate now find their memories colored by fear. Parents wonder whether a lecture or a town hall is inherently risky. Organizers who still believe in face-to-face engagement must balance their mission of openness with new questions about protection and risk. Those human reactions are as much a part of the aftermath as any political calculation. They show how violence reshapes perception and how long-lasting the effects can be on a community's sense of normalcy. Beyond politics, he was a husband and father deeply devoted to his family. Reports and recollections from friends and insiders paint a portrait of a man who, in private moments, was anchored by his family life. He married in 2021 and was a parent to 2 young children, often speaking publicly about their importance to his priorities and sense of purpose. That personal side complicates the public narrative. It is easy to talk about him as a political actor, but his absence is most deeply felt by people who knew him as a partner and parent. The grief his family now endures is private, intimate, and irreducible by public statements or partisan displays. For a movement that often frames itself as intergenerational and family-focused, the tragedy is painfully concrete. The loss is not an abstract political problem but a disruption to a household, to the routines and rituals that form a child's life. In moments of reflection, even staunch critics are reminded that politics is made up of individuals whose private lives are bound to their public work, and that the cost of polarizing contest can fall on the people closest to them. Tributes poured in from allies, supporters, and even political opponents acknowledging his influence. The immediate outpouring of condolence messages reflected how central he had become to certain conversations. Prominent voices in conservative media and allied political figures expressed shock and sorrow. At the same time, a number of people who had clashed with him over years of debate offered measured sympathy, noting the human cost of any violent event. In those brief moments of collective mourning, the grim reality of loss eclipsed the usual sharpness of political combat. For many observers, the cross-ideological messages of condolence were a reminder that, in the face of death, certain norms of basic decency still hold. But these tributes also prompted introspection. If a representative of a movement can be struck down at a campus gathering, what does that say about our public tone, and how should leaders adjust their rhetoric moving forward? The variety and volume of tributes underscore both the reach of Kirk's influence and the way tragedy can momentarily unite people who otherwise stand on different sides of the same debates. His death raises concerns about violence, political division, and safety at public events. In the wake of the shooting, serious questions were asked about security protocols, event planning, and the balance between open civic spaces and protective measures. Universities, community centers, and organizers across the country began reviewing their emergency plans. How to screen threats, how to position security without turning gatherings into fortresses, how to ensure rapid medical response. Beyond logistics, there is a deeper argument about the climate that makes such attacks conceivable. Polarization, the spread of inflammatory rhetoric, and the amplification of anger through social media all contribute to a context in which violence can feel more imaginable to some. Law enforcement officials and community leaders have repeatedly emphasized that political conflict is not a justification for violence, and that peaceful disagreement is a foundation of democratic life. Still, the killing sparked urgent debates about prevention, about how to promote civil discourse, and about whether more needs to be done to address the root drivers of political hostility. Institutions face difficult trade-offs, and any policy response must weigh civil liberties and openness against the legitimate need to protect participants in public life. Kirk's legacy highlights conviction, boldness, and the fragility of life in a polarized era. He built an organization and a persona by embracing conflict as a tactic and platform. That combative posture was effective in mobilizing supporters and in changing conversations. It also made him an especially visible and contentious figure. In reflecting on his life, it is necessary to hold multiple truths at once. He was an organizer who mentored many young activists, a provocateur who relished controversy, and a family man whose loss is deeply personal to those who loved him. The interplay of those roles makes his story complicated and instructive. It should prompt reflection about how we conduct political engagement and about the human beings at the center of public fights. The tragedy is an invitation to consider whether the current norms of political rhetoric and activism are sustainable, and whether a renewed commitment to nonviolence, decency, and protection of civic spaces is possible. The questions going forward are immediate and practical, and they are also moral and cultural. Investigations will seek accountability. Campus administrators will re-evaluate safety measures. Political leaders will decide how to respond rhetorically. For activists, organizers, and ordinary citizens, the event will linger as both a personal wound and a national moment of reckoning. Who fills the organizational gap left by a prominent leader is an open question for conservative politics. For a broader public, the larger challenge is how to ensure that debate and disagreement can continue without the danger of lethal escalation. As this community mourns, it is worth pausing on the human elements that often get lost in political analysis. There are grieving parents and children, there is a spouse who now faces a future without a partner, and there are friends who recall private moments of laughter and care that never make headlines. Recognizing that human cost does not mean ignoring political differences. It means acknowledging that personal tragedy complicates politics in ways that demand empathy and restraint. For listeners trying to make sense of what this means for the country, there are a few clear imperatives. First, investigations must be thorough and transparent so that justice can be pursued without fueling rumor. Second, institutions that host public debates must re-examine safety while preserving openness to the greatest extent possible. Third, political actors and influencers should consider the tone of their rhetoric and whether it contributes to an atmosphere that normalizes dehumanizing language. Finally, ordinary citizens must reckon with the fragility of public life and the responsibility of maintaining a civic culture that values disagreement but rejects violence. In the end, Charlie Kirk's life and death are both a personal tragedy and a public moment. He built a movement from youthful conviction. He spent years amplifying a vision and training others to carry it forward. His death jarringly reminds us that even the loudest voices can be silenced in a heartbeat, and that the costs of political conflict are not measured only in headlines but in the loss felt by families and communities. As we process this event, let it be a moment to recommit to protecting the spaces where ideas are exchanged and to remembering the human lives at stake in our disagreements. If you want this adapted into shorter audio segments, an article, or a narrated video series, tell me which format you prefer and I'll convert it. For ongoing updates on the investigation, tributes, and policy responses, make sure you're subscribed and have the bell turned on. We'll continue to follow this story closely and bring you each development as it arrives.